Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're time traveling, but not to see kings or conquerors. We're going to meet the ordinary people who did something truly extraordinary. We're heading to ancient Egypt, to the year 1157 BC, to witness the very first recorded labor strike in human history. Forget what you've seen in the movies. The people who built the magnificent tombs in the Valley of the Kings weren't slaves. They were the most highly skilled, respected, and well-paid artisans of their time. They lived in a special, secluded village called Set Ma'at, which translates to the place of truth. This was Deir el-Medina, home to the draftsmen, painters, and stonemasons who carved eternity for the pharaohs. Think of them as the middle-class elite of their day, a specialized workforce with a unique contract with the state. Their payment wasn't in gold coins, but in something far more valuable. Grain, wheat, and barley were the currency, the food, and the foundation of their lives. The deal was simple. The state provided regular rations in exchange for their unparalleled craftsmanship. And for generations, this system worked. But by the 29th year of Pharaoh Ramesses III's reign, the world was changing. The Great Bronze Age civilization was teetering on the edge of collapse. Across the region, empires were falling, trade routes were disrupted, and chaos was spreading. Egypt, while more stable than its neighbors, was not immune. It faced external threats, like the invasions of the Sea Peoples, which drained the royal treasury. Internally, things were just as bad. A series of poor harvests led to soaring grain prices, creating a full-blown economic crisis. And to make matters worse, corruption was rampant. Local officials, entrusted with distributing the workers' wages, were skimming off the top, siphoning away the very grain meant for the artisans of Set Ma'at. The state's promises were becoming empty words. The trouble really began to brew when payday came and went. The workers' grain rations were due on the 21st day of the month. The day passed, silence. The next day, and the next, still nothing. Weeks turned into a month. By the 21st of the following month, they had been without their full wages for over 20 days. Their families were going hungry. The state had broken its sacred promise. One of the workers, a scribe named Amenacht, decided to take matters into his own hands. Scribes were the record keepers, the educated class, and Amenacht was a respected leader within the community. He went to the local administrators, the very officials responsible for the delay, and tried to negotiate. He presented their case logically, reminding them of their duty. He was completely ignored. The officials stonewalled him, offering nothing but excuses and empty promises. The situation was desperate. Amenacht returned to the village, his efforts fruitless. The grumbling in the streets grew louder. These men, who spent their days carving divine images for the eternal afterlife of their king, were being left to starve in this one. They had tried to follow the rules, to go through the proper channels, but the system had failed them. It was time for a new strategy. So, one morning, something unprecedented happened. The rhythmic sound of chisels striking stone, the sound that had echoed through the village for centuries, fell silent. The workers put down their tools, not out of laziness, but out of desperation. They walked out of their village, not towards the tombs they were building, but towards the centers of power. They marched as one, a unified force of skilled laborers. Their destination was the grand mortuary temples on the west bank of the Nile, including the massive Ramesseum, the memorial temple of Ramesses the Great. As they marched, a single, powerful chant rose from the crowd, a cry that echoed across the desert landscape. "We are hungry. We are hungry." This wasn't a riot. It was a peaceful, organized protest. They weren't armed with weapons, but with the power of their collective voice and the righteousness of their cause. When they reached the temples, they did something that would have been unthinkable to any Egyptian. They sat down at the rear gates, effectively blockading the sacred grounds. In ancient Egyptian society, the temples were the homes of the gods on earth, and the mortuary temples were crucial for maintaining the cult of the deceased pharaoh. For ordinary people, to intentionally obstruct these holy sites was a massive taboo, a shocking act of defiance against both religious and royal authority. The local officials panicked. The chief of police was dispatched immediately. He strode up to the crowd of seated workers and ordered them to disperse, to go back to their village and get back to work. But the workers didn't budge. They weren't just hungry anymore. They felt betrayed. They shouted back at him, their grievance clear. This was no longer just about empty stomachs. It was about injustice. "We are hungry because of the great injustice in this place," one of them declared. They had upheld their end of the bargain, and the state had not. The sit-in continued. News of the protest traveled up the chain of command, causing a major headache for the authorities. This wasn't a group of disgruntled farmers. This was the pharaoh's own elite workforce, the keepers of sacred knowledge. Their refusal to work brought the most important construction project in the kingdom, the creation of the king as eternal home, to a grinding halt. Finally, after days of protest and immense pressure, the message reached the top. The vizier, essentially the prime minister of Egypt, was forced to act. He could not allow this disruption to continue. The sight of the king's own tomb builders protesting due to starvation was a monumental embarrassment and a threat to the stability of the state itself, a concept the Egyptians called Ma'at, or cosmic order. The vizier gave the order. The state granaries were opened. Carts laden with sacks of grain were dispatched to the workers. They received their overdue rations, their back pay, finally delivered. The workers, having won their fight, picked up their tools and returned to their sacred work. They had stood up to the power of the pharaoh's administration and forced it to listen. But this wasn't a one-time event. The underlying problems of corruption and economic instability didn't just disappear. Over the next few years, the workers of Deir el-Medina would go on strike again and again whenever their rations were delayed. The scribe Amenecht diligently recorded these events on a papyrus scroll, which we now call the Turin Strike Papyrus. Thanks to him, we have a detailed, first-hand account of these workers fighting for their rights, not with swords, but with solidarity. This story from over 3,000 years ago feels incredibly modern. It's a timeless tale of labor, management, and the struggle for fair treatment. It proves that the desire for justice and the power of collective action are fundamental parts of the human experience. These ancient artisans weren't just building tombs for the dead. They were building a legacy for the living, showing us that even in the shadow of pyramids and pharaohs, the voices of ordinary people, when raised together, cannot be ignored. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten history. See you next time.